Just when you think you have a lot of details about this case, because of the documents that were dumped by MPD, Moscow Police Department, we now have more details about what the roommates saw and heard during the night of the murders. Now, additionally, there's also details about the crime scene. And honestly, when I was reading these documents, I really did not think that it would get any worse. The details they're horrifying. They're horrific. What Bryan Kohberger did to those 4 victims, and hearing how some of the victims fought back. Yes, not just Kaylee fighting back, but it seems like Xana was also fighting back as well. But the conditions that he left those 4 students in were just atrocious. Now, Bryan Kohberger, he took a plea deal, so there's gonna be no trial. Usually in a trial, we hear extensive details about the evidence, the suspect, the victims, why sometimes maybe the crime took place, which I don't believe the state was gonna get into motive, but potentially the preparation, the cover-up afterwards, and then details about the commission of the crime. Instead of that, we have these documents that Moscow PD has released to the public. For free, by the way. Thank you, Moscow PD. There's also court documents that are currently sealed right now. The judge has already addressed that, saying that he's going to potentially unseal some of them in the future. He's got to go over them. He's got to go over it with the defense, the state as well, get their input, and then we'll hopefully see some more information about this case. Now, for now, I do want to do a series about the current documents that are released to the public right now. It's a lot. It's like 315 documents, who knows how many pages there are, but I finally got through all of them. So in this series, we're going to focus on information that is new to the public, information that I thought was, kind of interesting, and it might answer some of the lingering questions that we had in our minds. Now, some of it was, I want to say, a little confounding, and I want to know what your guys' thoughts on it. So we are going to do a series covering this, and today we're going to focus on the roommates, the recollection of what they saw and heard that night, and then we're going to segue into the crime scene itself. Details about Murphy the dog. Did he disturb the crime scene? And details about the friends that came over the morning afterwards, what they saw and what really went down. 1122 King Road had 6 people living in there in total, or actually maybe it was 5, and then Ethan would come on and off because he had his own place technically, but he would probably sleep over because Xana was there. And so there are 5 girls living at this house. 2 of the surviving roommates are Bethany and Dylan. Dylan's the one that's probably getting a lot of shit in the public because of Dylan seemingly hearing and seeing more that happened during the night of the murders. Bethany, on the other hand, didn't hear as much or see as much because she was on the first floor. Now, the configuration of this house is kind of odd because although Bethany's was on the first floor, Dylan's room on the second floor also exits out on the ground floor as well because the house is like on a hill. Bethany details about what she did the day before, and it is your typical college life, or I guess depending on what kind of college life you guys had. But for them, it was lots of drinking. It's the weekend, we're celebrating, or we're just drinking for fun. Now, they drink all day long. At some point, we're gonna just fast forward to like the nighttime. Bethany comes home and she's watching Vampire Diaries with the other roommate, Dylan, and another person. Around 1:45 to 2 a.m., that's when Kaylee and Madison are going to come home. That's the other 2 roommates. And Kaylee and Madison, they were at the corner club and they got hungry, went to the grub truck, which there is surveillance footage of that. So these 2 come home around 2 a.m. And at this point, the third person that was watching the movie on the couch decides to go home. Dylan goes to bed. Bethany, however, decides to hang out with Kaylee, Madison, probably just catching up to see what they did that day, and they were hanging out in Kaylee's room. At this point, everyone's either probably having a really good buzz from all the drinking or just really drunk at this time. Now, Kaylee has a dog named Murphy, and this is the golden doodle that was actually found at the crime scene the next day. She was co-owning this dog with her ex-boyfriend at the time. Now, this is how you know you have some really close friends. Maddie and Bethany took Kaylee's dog outside in the middle of the night for a potty break. And I've had some friends that have done that for me, and I've always appreciated that. Bethany thought to herself that it was kind of cold to be standing outside, so she did go inside a little bit earlier and decides to head to bed. She, like me, has trouble falling asleep. So what does she do? She has an iPad set up and she was watching this TV show called Baby Daddy. I've never heard of that before. So she starts getting a little bit sleepy and she turns off her iPad. Now, at some point, Maddie walks into a room and was like, "Hey, have you seen Murphy?" And she's like, "Oh, no, I haven't seen Murphy." "Okay, all right." And then she leaves. She falls back to sleep. She wakes up in the middle of the night and she hears a firecracker. And what she thought she saw was a sparkler going off underneath her bedroom door. This is completely new information to us, and I don't know exactly what she heard or what she saw. What would have made her heard a firecracker like sound? Because I was thinking maybe like someone cracking into the door, breaking into the door, but then she said she might have saw like a sparkler going off underneath. Maybe it was Brian Koberger entering into the house, cracking into a door or something, and then maybe like a flashlight. Would that mean that he possibly have entered on the first floor rather than the second floor where the sliding door was? So that's interesting, and I have no idea what the explanation for that would be. She can also hear Murphy, the dog, barking in the distance. We're gonna read and go over what she recounted to law enforcement because some of the narrative may have like changed just a tiny little bit. Some had more details. So we're gonna go over the narratives that we have so far that was documented by Moscow PD. There are currently no transcripts. There are currently no video interviews, audio interviews, but I think in the future, they might release that to the public. Now, this interview happened really early on. This is when law enforcement initially responded to a scene of 4 students brutally murdered in their own home. Outside of the home were the 2 surviving roommates and some of the friends that were called over to the scene. Bethany said she woke up in her bedroom, which was located on the first floor, to a sound she described as a firecracker and a flash. Bethany said she initially thought the sound was a prank. Here is another initial interview done by another police officer. At around 4 a.m. or 4:20 hours, Bethany heard what she thought was a firework and saw a spark on the ground from under her door. Bethany then heard Murphy barking. Dylan called Bethany and stated she'd seen someone in the house, and Bethany told her she can come down to her room and sleep with her. Bethany comes in again for a second interview. At this point, it's around 3 days after the murders had taken place. It's around 11:55 a.m. in the morning. Bethany said she woke up after falling asleep to hearing what she felt like was a firecracker go off, and she thought it was a sparkler going off through the crack under her door. Bethany stated that she didn't know what happened. Either Bethany called Dylan or Dylan called Bethany, and Dylan stated she thought she saw someone dressed in all black in the house. Bethany said that Xana had been wearing all black. This makes complete sense now because I was wondering why Bethany said Xana was wearing all black, or Xana was the one that was wearing a ski mask. Okay, now this makes sense. I think when Dylan said, hey, I just saw someone in the house wearing all black, Bethany was probably just like, oh, well, wasn't Xana wearing all black? Dylan responded by saying she thought he had a ski mask on. Bethany said she didn't really know what to say to what Dylan said. Bethany admitted both her and Dylan get scared easy. Bethany even thought maybe one of Ethan's frat brothers could have been playing a joke. Bethany told Dylan to come down to her room, and Dylan ran down to her room. Bethany tried calling Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan's phones, and nobody answered. Bethany said it was normal for Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan not to answer if they were sleeping if she called late at night. Bethany looked at her phone and it showed that Bethany called Dylan at 4:19 a.m. and at 4:20, Dylan called her back. During the call, Bethany asked Dylan if she heard a firecracker, and Dylan said she did. Bethany could not recall if it was during this call where Dylan was talking about seeing someone in black walking in the house. Once Bethany and Dylan were in Bethany's room together, they continued to talk about what they heard and saw. Bethany told me Dylan saw the male in black was walking out the back door and they had made eye contact with each other. Bethany said Dylan said the male was white with a big nose and that he was possibly holding a small vacuum type object. To this day, we still have no idea what this object Brian Koberger was holding, or if it was just a knife or it looked like he was like cradling something. We have no idea. Bethany and Dylan did not call 911 at the time because Bethany thought Dylan was imagining what she was talking about. Because remember, at this point, I think these 2 girls were drinking all day. They were intoxicated, or they're at least like coming off the alcohol. They were very sleepy. They're also very young, but I don't know. Bethany stated both her and Dylan were both drunk and they were very groggy. Now, Bethany told me prior to hearing the firecracker, she thought she heard Murphy barking. She also heard what she thought was the beer pong table moving and cups falling. The beer pong table is located in the living room, which is above Bethany's bedroom. Bethany stated that she was not sure what the sequence of events were for sure, but she knows she heard Murphy bark, the beer pong table, and then the firecracker first before she called Dylan to see if she heard the same thing. But yeah, this is pretty wild. Bethany told me she tried calling Xana and Maddie at 4:21 a.m. and then tried calling Ethan at 4:22. Bethany stated she tried calling Maddie, Kaylee, Xana several more times once Dylan got into her room. Bethany told me that she went to bed. She remembers most of the lights being on inside the house. Bethany told me after trying to contact the other roommates, she fell back to sleep, then woke up at around 7:30 a.m., tried calling her dad about her tooth. Now, I remember hearing about the roommates trying to reach out to the dad and, try to talk to them. I thought it was because the roommates were freaked out and was like, hey, dad, like something weird just happened. What should I do? But it seems like that wasn't the case. Bethany called her dad again at 8 a.m., but there was no answer. Her house at 8, then she calls her house at 8:01 a.m. with no answer, then called her mom at 8:02, and he answered and asked to talk to her dad, or then she answered. Her dad called back at 8:09, and she talked to him. Okay, we're getting the pronouns all wrong, and eventually took Advil for her twos. Bethany then fell back to sleep. Bethany woke up at 11 hours and noticed no one else in the house was up. Bethany stated she knew this because Xana's Snapchat location was not on, and it should have been. Bethany and Dylan got scared because they should have been up. Bethany called her friend, Jay, and told her she and Dylan were scared and asked if they can come over and get them. So if Bethany calls her parents around, 7, 8 a.m. in the morning, then to me that would signal that she really didn't think anything was happening in the house and that she didn't take Dylan very seriously. Now let's jump over to Dylan because Dylan's the one that actually heard and saw more things going on in the house. This is when Dylan was first interviewed while she was standing outside the house when law enforcement responded to the scene. I walked outside and began interviewing Dylan. Dylan told me at approximately 4 a.m. she heard a voice scream and believed it to be Kaylee's. I don't think we've heard that before. I think that's new information. Dylan said she heard Kaylee scream and announced there was somebody inside the residence. Dylan said she could hear Kaylee run from the 3rd floor, down the stairs to the 2nd floor, into the northwest bedroom. This is a little bit confusing because we don't know if it's Kaylee or Xana. There is a correction at the bottom because initially the officer got Xana and Kaylee mixed up. However, it's possible that she could have still thought this was Kaylee and then just got the rooms mixed up between Kaylee and Xana in the narrative before. So she thought she heard Kaylee run downstairs. Dylan said she locked herself in her bedroom and continued to hear a commotion. Dylan said eventually she stopped hearing a struggle. So she heard a struggle. Oh gosh, I'm trying to be real patient here. And heard a male voice say, "You're gonna be fine. I'm gonna help you." Dylan said she didn't recognize the male's voice. Dylan said after a few minutes, she peeked out of her bedroom and observed a male, described as approximately 6 feet tall, slim build with a black ski mask, leave the 2nd floor patio area. This patio door was likely left open as it was found open upon my arrival. Oh boy. So it's like you heard your roommate scream and there was this guy in black and he was a tall dude that you don't recognize in your house. And I don't know, guys. I'm trying hard to be patient here and being understanding of this. Now, in this other interview that she gives to another officer, I honestly don't think it gets any better because we find out that Dylan's bedroom is directly under Kaylee's bedroom, and that's where Kaylee and Maddie were both murdered. Dylan said she woke up at 4 a.m. on 11/13/2022, where she could hear Kaylee and Murphy, the dog, dancing. Dylan said she knew it was Kaylee because she recognized her voice and could hear Murphy barking. Dylan said she heard Kaylee go upstairs and say, "There is someone here." Dylan said she thought she heard Kaylee run back down the stairs. Dylan said Kaylee sounded scared when she made this statement. Dylan said at this time she jumped up, locked the door because she did not know what else to do. Dylan said she called out Kaylee's name and did not indicate if she got a response. Dylan said she tried to call Kaylee, Xana, Maddie on their phones. Dylan was asked if she saw anyone come downstairs or heard anything. Dylan said, "No, I don't even know how they got in. We're usually pretty good about locking doors and never had problems before. I was just really random." I think it says it was just really random. When asked again about the series of events, Dylan said she opened the door when she cried out to Kaylee, then closed the door because she was scared. Dylan said she then opened the door again and heard who she thought was Kaylee, but could have been Xana crying in the bathroom. Dylan said she then heard a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm gonna help you." Dylan said it was weird because the statement was not in a nice way, and the voice was one she never heard of before. Dylan said she called to Kaylee again. There was no crying after, and she did not know what happened after. Dylan said she opened the door again, and the guy is right there. Dylan described the male as at approximately her height, 5'10", or a few inches taller, not skinny, but athletic build. Dylan said the suspect was wearing all black with mask that covered just his forehead and goes around his face. Dylan showed with her hands the mask exposed his nose, but covered the mouth area. Dylan said she believed the suspect was white, but did not remember the eyebrow color or what his eyes looked like. Dylan said she saw the suspect, he saw her, and he just left. I wonder if he saw her. Dylan said she believed he was holding something near his stomach or belt line. Dylan used both hands to point straight out from her abdomen. Dylan then moved her hands apart and back together to stimulate a bulge. So I guess like something like this, maybe. Dylan said this area was black in color, and she thought now maybe it was a gun. Dylan said the unknown object had an arrow shape. Dylan seemed really unsure and said she was tired during the event. Dylan was asked how long she believed it was from the time Kaylee said someone is here to when she saw the suspect. Dylan said she thought it for about 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Dylan went on to say that she was in and out of it and she did not fully remember the incident. Dylan was asked where the suspect was at the time of the residence when Dylan saw him. Dylan said the suspect was between her bedroom door and the kitchen. Dylan said she remembered watching the suspect go out the kitchen door and leave. Dylan said this time she closed her door and locked it as fast as she could. Dylan said the suspect did not walk towards her or say anything. Dylan said that once the suspect left, she immediately called Bethany. Bethany informed her she heard a sound that sounded like a firework. Dylan then said she told Bethany she called everyone and they're not answering. Dylan said she was in and out of it, believed everyone was just asleep. Oh gosh, I don't know. It's like, it just, I guess we have to listen to the interview ourselves, to her interview, because it seems like she heard Kaylee and the dog playing around. Kaylee at some point was like, hey, there's someone here, goes upstairs. She hears like a ruckus, a commotion. She hears someone crying. She hears like an unknown male voice. And then she actually sees a guy wearing all black with a ski mask on leaving the house. Jesus, I'm trying really hard to really understand and take a perspective here because I know like traumatic things can make you do really weird stuff at the time. I don't know. It's like you still had time to semi-process it. And instead of calling your roommate, call 911. I don't know. I'm just being really harsh, I guess. And I'm trying really hard to understand. But I wonder if the family members knew the extent of the details of the roommates' interviews, because I know the family members, they absolutely do not blame the roommates whatsoever. And I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I heard that, you know, what Brian Kohlberger did to the victims, there was no way that even if law enforcement responded, they would have been able to be saved, it seems, because the injuries were so extensive. However, if she heard the commotion while they were being attacked and then didn't call law enforcement during that time, you know, if I was the family members, yeah, I would be pretty fucking pissed. But at the end of the day, you just gotta, you know, realize that these guys are kids and they're growing up. I don't know. People do weird things in traumatic situations, I guess. You know, it's probably one of those things where you would think that if you were put in the same exact situation, you would have been like, oh, I would have done something differently. Or like, you know, when we watch a scary movie and you're criticizing the people for what they're doing to survive, you know, maybe when something that traumatic happens, when you're drunk, when you're young, it's easy to just be like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm just imagining things. Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe that was a prank. Maybe that was someone else. So, you know, I try to leave my mind open to the possibility that shit happens. Shit like that happens. I know the judge in this case was being very sympathetic to the surviving roommates, and he's seen a lot of cases. So he's probably seen cases where people do things that may seem completely fucking unreasonable given what they're facing. Dylan then said she went around to Bethany's room, locked the door, and went to bed. Dylan said she woke up at around 11 or 12 hours and called her roommates and no one answered. Here's a statement that law enforcement took of one of the friends that actually came over because the roommates were so scared. A stated that Dylan called her at approximately 11:51 hours that morning and said last night around 4 a.m. she heard and saw a man and she and Bethany were locked in their room sleeping, and added that she wanted A to come over to check the house because she was too scared. A also said Dylan heard Gonzalez scream and run up the stairs. A while later, Dylan came out of her room and saw the man staring at her. A stated the man didn't do anything to Dylan. Dylan said that she stayed locked in her room and heard the side door close, so she ran into Bethany's room. I asked A if she asked Dylan why she didn't call anyone that night. A stated that Dylan told her it was because she was intoxicated and didn't want to believe what was going on. Dylan also told A the man was wearing a mask and she could only see his eyes and nose. Like, I know when something traumatic happens, denial is one of the things that you might go through, but this is a huge denial. This is a major denial. Now, leading up to the crime scene, I do want to go over what Hunter Johnson saw. So Hunter Johnson is one of the friends that the roommates called over because they were scared. It was the next morning. Nobody was awake. Nobody was answering their phone. So Hunter Johnson comes over with some other people, and this is what he told law enforcement. Now, we know it's Hunter because he participated in the Amazon docuseries that came out recently. Hunter said that around 12 p.m. on 11/13/2022, Dylan called E, Hunter's girlfriend. Dylan told E that she thought she saw something was not right in the house. Dylan also told E she heard or saw a man in her house the night prior. Dylan asked E and Hunter to come over and to make sure everything was okay because she had locked herself in Bethany's room. Hunter said he was the first person to get to the residence. Hunter said he entered the code to the front door where Bethany and Dylan were in Bethany's room on the first floor. Dylan and Bethany were telling Hunter they didn't know what was going on. Hunter said he went up the stairs and immediately went to Xana's room. Hunter said this was the only room he went into. Hunter said when he approached the door, it was only partially open. Hunter said when he opened it, he saw Xana and Ethan. Hunter said he initially did not realize all the blood was dry blood in the room. He thought at first they had been drunk and left a mess. When he stood there for a moment, he began to realize what he was seeing. Bethany and Dylan were uncontrollably crying. Hunter said he told them to get out of the house and call law enforcement. He then went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer. He then went to the room and checked the closet to make sure there was not anyone else in the room. He checked for a pulse on both Xana and Ethan and said both their bodies had rigor mortis and were cold, with no breath or pulse. He believed the two had been deceased for a while. He believed he left the knife on the folding table in the living room. Hunter said that E, J, and I think that's L, started to enter the house and come up the stairs. Hunter told them to get out of the residence. Hunter said this was about the time Moscow PD arrived on the scene. The officer told him to stay where he was at. He did not know if anyone else was upstairs as he had not gone anywhere else in the house. He had trouble comprehending what he was seeing. So we're hearing from the roommates. We hear from Dylan. We hear from Bethany. We hear from the friends that come over. But what about the neighbors? What did the neighbors hear? Now, some of the neighbors did hear the dog barking, but they didn't hear any commotion. They didn't really see anything suspicious happening. For example, one of the persons said that they were laying in bed and they could hear the dog, possibly Murphy, barking around that time, around 4 a.m. One of the resident, BP, stated that around 4 a.m. he heard a dog barking coming from the east side of his residence. He believed it was a dog at 1122 King Road, as he thought that was the only dog in the area. He said the dog sounded like it was outside and was barking for about 45 minutes until he believed someone must have let it inside at 4:45 a.m. when it stopped. B stated that he had a female with him in bed at the time who also heard the dog barking at the time. Here's another resident, SG. He woke up a couple of times Saturday night. He looked at the wall and saw it was 4:17 hours and said that around 5 minutes of waking, he heard a dog barking outside from the direction of 1122 King Road. G said that he was going in and out of sleep, and after an hour around 5 a.m., he still heard the dog barking outside from the direction of 1122 King Road. What I'm wondering is, what about the roommates? They must have heard the dog barking as well. No? Wouldn't they also hear Murphy because they're a lot closer? Weren't they wondering, why is Murphy barking so much? He heard the dog barking around 5 a.m. G said his bedroom is from the far northeast side of redacted Walenta, and it's close to the backyard of 1122 King Road. G said there is a motion light outside of his window and said if it turned on, he would have noticed it. G told me that he has lived in this residence since January and has not heard the dog barking outside before in the middle of the night. Now, this next person, I don't know if they're a neighbor or they're just happening to walk by, but 4 days after the victims' bodies were found, someone came in to interview with Moscow PD. This person said that around 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. That morning, Sunday, that he was walking his dog, that he walked by the first time and he noticed the front door to 1122 King Road on the north side of the building facing campus was wide open. He stated that he knew it was a party house, so assumed that someone was too intoxicated, maybe forgot to close the door the night prior. He said the walk took approximately about 1 hour. They also stated that they walked back to his apartment around 11 a.m. and the front door was still wide open. And said that he was unsure if the information was known or not, but he thought he should report it. I wonder if the front door was wide open or if this was like another incident. Maybe like this was a different day. Maybe a day when law enforcement was already processing the crime scene. I don't know, but having the front door being wide open, it's kind of interesting. Each of the officers in this case, they're going to fill out a narrative and they are going to describe the crime scene. It's interesting to me to see how different some of the descriptions are and how very similar they are as well. Some officers may have noticed small things. Some officers were very keen on certain types of details, and some officers were very descriptive of what they saw. It's actually really quite interesting to see how organized MPD is compared to some other places that we're not going to talk about, but I do appreciate how thorough they were in documenting things and doing it in very speedy fashion, it seems. Unlike some people, not documenting chain of custody and other stuff or interviews. This is the narrative of Officer Nunez, who responded to the scene. I was directed to a bedroom on the second floor by HJ, I think it's Hunter Johnson, in the northwest corner to locate the unresponsive female. Upon entering the room, I observed a female laying supine on the floor next to the bed. According to DM, this female was likely Kaylee Gonzalez. They actually got it mixed up. It's actually supposed to be Xana. I observed dry blood surrounding Kaylee's body and signs of cutting trauma to her face. So because the officer got the name wrong, I'm just going to correct it and say Xana. I observed dry blood surrounding Xana's body and signs of cutting trauma to her face. Xana was covered in so much blood, I wasn't able to immediately discern where any of the additional injuries would have likely been. Xana was apparently deceased due to her pale skin, color, rigid body tone, and apparent blood loss. On the same bed in the same room, I observe a male lying supine on the bed. According to Dylan, the male was likely Ethan Chapin. Dylan said Ethan was commonly at the residence. I observed blood covering portions of Ethan's legs, surrounding his body into the bed sheets, and drops of blood on the wall near Ethan's head. As I backed out of this room, Hunter showed me a kitchen knife and said that he had it in his possession. I told Hunter to leave the knife and go back downstairs to the front entrance. Officer Warner and I moved to visually clear the residence for any suspects or additional victims. On the third floor, Officer Warner and I found two additional apparently deceased females, both lying supine in the bed. The bedroom was the southwest corner of the third floor. According to Dylan, these two females were likely Susanna, but supposed to be Kaylee, and Madison Mogan. One female showed an apparent traumatic injury to her face due to basic facial structure being unrecognizable. This would have been Kaylee. Both females showed very pale skin. Both females were covered in dried blood and apparently deceased. After the residence was deemed safe, Officer Warner and I exited the residence to secure it and the immediate area to include the parking lot immediately to the north of the residence. Now, we're going to get more details about Xana because from what I've read so far, it seems like Xana fighting hard to fight for their lives. Like they were fighting against this 6 foot tall one creepy man who was in their house, creeping up on them while they were drunk and with a fucking weapon. It seems like to me that Ethan may have already been passed out possibly, so he was unable to protect himself. Same thing with Maddie. Maddie was reported to have possibly been really intoxicated and maybe not even have a chance to even try to defend herself. Maybe she tried or maybe she was passed out. I'm not really quite sure. Bethany, the surviving roommate, also saw Xana as well when she was behind Hunter. Bethany saw Xana in her sweatshirt and Xana was in her underwear and she was lying on the ground. Now, was it common for Xana to be lying on the ground like that? Bethany did say that she would often hear that Xana sometimes would lay on the ground if she was like really intoxicated from the night before, but she's never actually witnessed it herself. Another officer that responds to the scene describes Xana having deep lacerations on her hands, which could have been indicative of defensive wounds. Ethan also had stab wounds and a laceration to his neck as well. Now, when they're describing both Kaylee and Madison, again, they're going to reiterate that Kaylee was almost unrecognizable. Her injuries were so severe to her face that you can't even tell where some of the injuries were, or where the injuries were. Now with Maddie, it seems like she didn't have the disfigurement that Kaylee had on her face, but Maddie still suffered from multiple stab injuries that they could visually see. Another officer also notices numerous of injuries on Xana's hands, her arms, and her face as well. They also noticed that there was a nightstand that was pushed up really oddly against the wall as if it just been moved, probably during the struggle, and that there was also blood on this nightstand. Now, looking over at Ethan, remember how we kept hearing about how the killer carved into Ethan's leg, and a lot of us were wondering, that sounds really personal. That sounds like a really weird thing to do. We're getting a little bit more details about that. Chapin's body was at an angle on the bed so that his head was up against the south wall and his feet were hanging off the bed on the north side. I also noticed 2 large cuts to the back of Chapin's legs. The wounds appeared to be deep into the tissue, but were difficult to see due to Ethan's body position. This same officer is also going to be the one that notices a tan leather knife sheath next to Madison's body. Now, what else do law enforcement notice at the crime scene? They noticed that the sliding glass door was open. Not only that, but there was a footprint, a very large footprint, embedded in the ground, or was it in the snow? I was assigned to hold security to the rear sliding door. This was the alleged point of entry of the suspect. I observed very large footprints in the snow. I used a tape measure and the shoe size measured approximately 13.5 to 14 inches. The footprints went to and from the rear slider door. I observed the trail of the footsteps. I observed the trail of the footsteps head away from the slider, then turn right around a stump in a backyard and lean toward the front of the house. I observed a small set of small handprints on the windows to the east of the slider. The screen to this window appeared damaged and was laying on the ground. I located a smudge of fingerprints on the glass slider door. There was a discarded black backpack in the backyard. I photographed these items and attached them to the case. Now, from my understanding, if I remember correctly, this black backpack doesn't have anything to do with this case. It was just something that was just like left, who knows when. Now, another officer said they were unable to discern when the footprints occurred because there hadn't been any fresh snowfall lately. So the footprints could have been from the last time that it snowed until as early as the night before or that morning of. They also had cadaver dogs at the crime scene as well to try to attempt and locate maybe like a blood trail from the residence. When Brian Koberger is arrested, they are going to take an impression of his shoe, I believe, the different shoes that he owns, the ones that they got from his house. And they are going to make a comparison to the footprints that were found at the crime scene. Now, unfortunately, we don't have access to those documents right now. Maybe it'll be a part of the sealed documents and become unsealed later on in the future, but they do make that analysis. Now, the victims' bodies were transported for autopsies to be performed, and the autopsy was actually done about 3 days afterwards. The law enforcement, they not only had to attend one autopsy, but 4 autopsies of 4 very young people who are not supposed to be dying at a very young age. Now, the autopsy is going to go over essentially what were the fatal injuries on the 4 victims, and then to the extent of the defensive wounds of Xana and Kaylee, while they're trying to defend themselves and fight back against Brian Koberger, who came in the middle of the night while they were asleep, drunk, at college to murder them. At the conclusion of the 4 autopsies, Dr. S met with Kathy Mabbitt, Gary Tolson, and myself and told us the following. Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle, which severed his subclavian vein and subclavian artery, and was also his jugular vein was severed. Ethan only had sharp force injuries. Xana Kernodle's fatal injuries were from 1 laceration in her right lung and 2 lacerations in her heart. Kernodle had 50 plus stab wounds, mostly defensive. Xana only had sharp force injuries. Madison Mogan's fatal injuries included left lung laceration and a liver laceration. Madison only had sharp force injuries. Kaylee Gonzalez's fatal injuries included left lung laceration, a liver laceration, 2 subdural bleeds, and a stab behind her clavicle, which cut her subclavian vein and artery. Kaylee had signs of sharp force injuries, asphyxial injuries. I wonder if that means that, was he trying to choke her or something like that? And blunt force injuries, which we've heard from her father doing the interviews recently, that Kaylee had injuries to her face. I think it was mentioned that her teeth were knocked out and she had a broken nose. Dr. S said the weapon used was not serrated, single edge, very sharp, and said a lot of force was used by the suspect. After Brian Koberger is arrested, about a year and a half later, the prosecutor is going to meet with the coroner's office, and they are essentially going to go over how the K-bar knife could have caused some of the injuries on the victims. This is something that you would normally see in the testimony, where they are going to go over specific injuries and how the injuries can look a certain way caused by a specific weapon. And this is what we would have saw in the trial. On June 28, 2023, at approximately 10:30 hours, myself along with Bill Thompson, Ashley Jennings, Bill Nye, Ingrid Beatty met with Dr. S at the Spokane County Medical Examiner's office. Dr. S had pre-selected several photos from each victim to go over with us so she could describe the shape of the weapon which would have caused the injuries. I removed the K-bar knife from the sealed package and showed it to Dr. S. Dr. S stated the shape, the size of the K-bar knife was consistent with being the weapon which could have caused the injuries on all 4 of the victims. Dr. S described how some of the wounds had 2 points on either end and how some wounds had a point on one end and a square shape at the other end. Now, there was this theory that was floating around that there could have been 2 weapons used against, I think it was against Kaylee? Dr. S explained how the K-bar knife could have created these wounds, depending on the depth of the injury. Dr. S explains the tip of the knife having sharp edges on the other side would show a wound on the points on either end. Dr. S described a deeper wound would show a point on one side and the square on the other, and how it matched the shape of the knife blade, having the single sharp edge on one side and the square edge on the other below the tip. Dr. S pointed out that some of the wounds had a mark that was consistent with the guard of the K-bar knife. Now, this, I think, could have been what confused people into thinking that maybe it was 2 weapons that was used against one of the victims, because maybe they thought it was a knife and then like some sort of other like blunt object. But if it was a knife and then you use the blunt end of the K-bar knife that could have also been used to strike the victims, specifically Kaylee. Dr. S described how the wounds could look different depending on the skin stretching, the dynamics of the situation at the time, the angle or position the knife was in when it was inserted and or removed, and how a victim was moving or not moving at the time. Dr. S described some injuries depicted that the strength of the weapon itself and the force used would have been great. Reading all this is very harrowing. I know stabbings by nature is a very violent thing, but hearing about how the victims, for example, Xana wasn't even in her bed, she was fighting back. Hearing about Kaylee also fighting back as well, to the point where the killer, Bryan Kohberger, had disfigured her face. It wasn't just simply victim sleeping in the bed, I'm going to stab him once, twice, and they're just out. They're out cold. No, this is like very violent. The victims, some of them were very involved into this. It probably felt like forever as they were trying to fight back against this fucking loser who broke into their house. You know, hearing about 30 defensive wounds, 50 defensive wounds, hearing about the injuries to Kaylee's face. It's just so much more worse than what I was kind of imagining in my head. Like, yes, this crime was already really bad, but just hearing more details about it, I can see why the families were so pissed at Bryan Kohberger. The emotions were certainly very high during that sentencing, and I'm glad that some of them were able to embarrass Bryan Kohberger in front of the world, shame him publicly. Now, jumping back over to the crime scene, a lot of us were wondering about Murphy, Kaylee's golden doodle. Murphy was brought to the Humane Society and then later on picked up by Kaylee's ex-boyfriend because, again, they shared the dog. Now, we were wondering, where was Murphy around this time? Was Murphy with the girls? Was Murphy disturbing the crime scene? How did Murphy not track blood around the house? Did the roommates not see Murphy? So we do get some answers about Murphy the dog. And a lot of us also thought that it's weird that a killer would murder 4 people but leave the dog completely unscathed. We do find out that Bryan Kohberger, I don't know if he was a vegan at the time that he was arrested, but they did mention him being vegan, and maybe he had some sort of, maybe he gives animals more and more consideration than he does towards human beings. Oh man, poor Murphy. On 11/13/2022, I arrived at King Road, reference an unconscious subject. When I arrived on the 3rd floor to assess the scene, I noticed a medium-sized, curly-haired tan dog on the bed inside the western 3rd floor bedroom, later identified as Kaylee Gonzalez's room. The dog appeared timid, scared, and didn't react to our presence. Due to the chaos surrounding the scene, my initial concern was preserving the scene. As part of that process, I asked one of the officers to shut the door so the dog did not attempt to jump on the bed with any of the victims. After the area was cordoned off and the area was secure, Corporal Snyder began taking photos of the scene. At some point, prior to this process, the dog moved from the bed to under the desk in Kaylee's room. Oh my god, this poor dog's so scared. After photos were completed, I asked LCSO Deputy Olson to respond and assist by taking the dog to the Humane Society of the Palouse for safekeeping. I collected the dog from under the desk. The dog was timid and took some coaxing to move from under the desk, but did not appear to have any obvious injuries or stains on his body or paws. Due to the amount of blood inside the bedrooms where the victims were located and the lack of blood on or around the dog, I don't believe the dog was on or around the victims. So again, the girls were found in Maddie's room. Murphy must have went back to Kaylee's room because Murphy must have been like so scared and didn't know what happened to Kaylee and Maddie. I walked the dog to the front door where Officer Warner was stationed and asked him to hold on to the dog until Deputy Olson arrived. A short time later, Deputy Olson arrived. I walked the dog from Officer Warner to Deputy Olson, who was standing in the street. At my request, Deputy Olson transported the dog to the Humane Society of the Palouse. I asked Deputy Olson to write the intake sheet of the Humane Society to not release the dog to anyone unless MPD gave approval first. And so at first I was like, why would they take it to the Humane Society? There's like roommates there, there's like people there, you know, people you can contact, but it does make sense that they want to make sure they secure the dog. And poor Kaylee's ex-boyfriend was trying to get the dog, but like they wouldn't release him initially, and there was like some delays, but eventually he was able to get Murphy and get him under his care. But yeah, that's what happened to Murphy. We wanted to know if Murphy may have disturbed the scene, if Murphy was with the girls, if there was like blood all over the house. It seems like no, because it seems like Murphy just ended up hiding in Kaylee's room. Oh my god, poor Bubby. Now, that's all that we're going to be covering in this video, but oh my gosh, we have so much more information that we find out about Bryan Kohberger's background, his job as a teaching assistant, and him essentially getting fired, his interview that he did in Pennsylvania, other potential leads that law enforcement was pursuing and ended up being dead ends. There was also information about the victims, and then whether or not Brian Koberger was he stalking them prior, because Kaylee seemed to have felt like she was being stalked by someone, and there were some weird incidents with Murphy as well. Murphy sensing that there may have been someone that doesn't belong around outside of the house, and this was something that was shared to other people. There's also what was recovered from Brian Koberger's phone, his computers, and there's just so much stuff in here, guys. There's just so much in these documents, and it took a while. It took a while to read all of them. And then lastly, honestly, there's also Brian Koberger and him being in jail. There's jail calls that we don't have access to, but interactions with other jail inmates that's been documented. And then lastly, which I will probably cover, the false tips that came in about this case. Now, a lot of people, they have, they have good intentions, right? They want to make sure that just in case law enforcement might be able to use this, to me, it might seem like worthless information, but I'm going to share with law enforcement anyways. But there are some people that seem to have just wanted to just mislead law enforcement. I don't know, just call them up with some crazy ass lies. And then there's some people that were calling, trying to clear Brian Koberger of these crimes. It's pretty fucking wild, y'all. So anyways, guys, you guys enjoyed watching this. Stay tuned for the other videos that we're going to make. Sorry, my mind just like blipped there. I'm just so hungry right now. Stay tuned for the other videos that we're gonna be making, covering the rest of the Moscow PD documents. And other than that, guys, feel free to join the Discord. We do have a true crime section if you want to post anything true crime related, or there's other channels in there that's non-true crime related if you guys want to talk about that. And then lastly, I will see you guys in a couple of weeks for Donald Adelson's trial, unless this ends up getting pushed out again, but we'll see about that. So feel free, stop by the live stream, say hello. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and comment down below what you guys think about what we've heard so far. It's pretty wild. Yep. I'll see you guys. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.